Imagine for a moment that you wake up in the middle of the night to the rhythmic and constant sound of raindrops hitting your window pane. It is a comforting sound, the perfect backdrop for a gray day, ideal for staying under the blankets. But a week passes, and the storm does not cease at all. The sky remains a vault of dark lead. A month passes, and the city drainage systems collapse. Rivers begin to overflow, devouring bridges and roads. An entire year passes, and all of humanity no longer remembers how the warmth of sunlight felt on their skin. The dampness penetrates everything. Despair seizes the world. Now, push that thought to the very edge of sanity. Imagine that this torrential rain does not stop, not for a decade, not for a century, not for an entire millennium. Imagine that the sky breaks apart and pours its fury uninterruptedly, day after night, night after day, for the staggering amount of 2 million years. It sounds like the exaggerated premise of an apocalyptic science fiction novel, or perhaps a final divine punishment pulled from the pages of humanity's oldest scriptures. But I assure you, it is not a myth, it is not a legend. It is an absolutely and terrifyingly real event, a brutal climate cataclysm that fractured the history of our planet in half, and that science kept secret, hidden beneath layers of sedimentary rock for entire eons. It was a deluge of such colossal proportions, so incomprehensible to the human mind, that it rewrote the rules of life itself on Earth from scratch. It was an event that mercilessly drowned the dynasties that reigned at the time and crowned, from the mud and destruction, the undisputed kings who would dominate the world for the following eras. Welcome to the most fascinating geological mystery of our past, the Carnian Pluvial episode, the infinite storm. To understand the true magnitude and horror of this endless deluge, we must first take an unimaginable journey through time. Let us rewind exactly 232 million years into the deep past of our world. We find ourselves in the middle of the Triassic period. If you had the power to orbit and observe the Earth from space at this precise moment, I guarantee you would not recognize your own home. The 7 continents we study on maps today, scattered across a familiar blue ocean, do not exist. All the landmass of the planet, from the tundras to the tropics, is violently crushed together, fused into a single, vast, and monstrous supercontinent, Pangaea, a giant of Earth surrounded by a single, terrifyingly large global ocean called Panthalassa, and the interior of Pangaea was a hell on Earth. Because of its colossal and boundless size, the moisture-laden winds from the Panthalassa Ocean simply lacked the strength to penetrate into the heart of this colossal landmass. The center of Pangaea was, therefore, a gigantic hyper-arid desert, a scorching, red, and dusty wasteland where daytime temperatures reached lethal extremes that would make the modern Sahara Desert seem like a temperate getaway. Water was a mirage, a practically non-existent treasure, and droughts lasted for entire centuries. However, life, stubborn and resilient as always, tried to find a way. Strange, primitive reptiles, heavily armored beasts resembling giant terrestrial crocodiles, and the furry earliest ancestors of mammals lumbered heavily along the margins of this immense oven of sand and rock. They barely survived, trapped in an extremely fragile biological balance. And the dinosaurs? Yes, dinosaurs already existed in this unforgiving world, but they were very far from being the terrifying titans that star in our nightmares and movies today. In this era, they were small, rare, agile, but fearful creatures. They lived on the margins, hiding in the shadows of the large armored predators, settling for the scraps of a desolate world that did not belong to them.
The Earth had spent tens of millions of years plunged into this perpetual, punishing drought. It seemed the unmovable destiny of the planet was to slowly wither under a merciless sun, becoming an inert, dry rock floating in space. But in the unfathomable depths of the Earth's mantle, right beneath what we now know as the western coast of North America and Canada, something titanic was about to awaken from its slumber. A continent-sized wound in the Earth's crust was about to tear wide open. Primordial magma, burning and destructive, bubbling with uncontrollable fury, building incalculable pressure miles beneath the cracked surface. It was preparing to unleash a chain reaction of catastrophic events that would alter the very chemistry of the atmosphere and turn this hell of dust and sand into a hell of water and mud. The greatest climate shift of antiquity was about to begin, and it would all start with the single, solitary drop falling upon the dust. The trigger for this apocalyptic nightmare did not descend from the clouds, but erupted from the very bowels of the planet. Today, geologists refer to this region as the Wrangellia Terrane, a massive geological formation stretching across modern-day Western Canada and Alaska. But 232 million years ago, it was the site of a rupture so violent it defies all human comprehension.
The Earth did not merely erupt, it unzipped. Massive fissures, stretching for hundreds of miles, tore across the landmass. From these glowing chasms, unimaginable volumes of basaltic lava surged to the surface. We are not talking about a single volcanic peak erupting for a few weeks. We are talking about literal oceans of liquid fire flooding the landscape continuously, relentlessly, for hundreds of thousands of years. The scale of this devastation was so absolute that it makes our most destructive modern volcanoes look like mere sparks in a campfire. But the lava, as deadly as it was only the beginning of the nightmare. The true killer was invisible. As these continent-sized rivers of magma boiled to the surface, they incinerated vast underground deposits of carbon and organic matter, vomiting millions upon millions of tons of carbon dioxide and deadly greenhouse gases directly into the prehistoric atmosphere. The sky, once a hazy, dusty blue, turned into a suffocating dome of toxic heat. A runaway greenhouse effect gripped the entire planet in an inescapable chokehold. Global temperatures spiked wildly. The oceans, previously cool and relatively stable, began to heat up to the point of turning into hot tubs of stagnant, oxygen-deprived water. Marine life began to suffocate and die by the millions, their bodies sinking to the dark bottom of the Panthalassa Ocean, creating massive dead zones. But this intense, suffocating heat had a secondary, even more terrifying consequence. It turned the boiling global ocean into a colossal evaporation engine. The heated waters rose into the atmosphere at unprecedented speeds. The air became a swollen, heavy, supersaturated sponge, carrying more moisture than at any other point in Earth's entire history. The atmospheric pressure built up to critical levels. The skies darkened with towering, bruised clouds of a size never seen before. And then, the breaking point was reached. The heavens fractured. The first heavy drops slammed into the parched, cracked dust of Pangaea. For the ancient, thirsty creatures of the desert, it might have seemed like a miraculous salvation, a gift from the skies after millions of years of drought. But the relief was a deadly illusion. It was not a gentle, life-giving shower. It was a torrential, violent, unrelenting onslaught driven by hyper-hurricanes born from the boiling seas. Flash floods the size of modern oceans tore through ancient dry valleys, pulverizing rock and turning sweeping deserts into raging, turbulent seas of mud and debris. The rain did not stop that night. It did not stop the next day, nor the next year.
Generation after generation of creatures would be born, live their entire terrifying lives in the mud, and die without ever once seeing a clear blue sky. The reign of the old armored masters of the dry earth was washed away in a torrent of despair, their heavy bodies sinking into the flooded oblivion. The world was drowning. But within this dark, watery apocalypse, while giants perished, the seeds of a new empire were quietly taking root.
As the centuries bled into millennia, and the millennia stretched into an unimaginable abyss of time, the very face of Pangaea was violently and irrevocably transformed. The barren, red, cracked deserts that had defined the world for ages were entirely washed away. In their place, fueled by the relentless deluge and the suffocating greenhouse-warmed atmosphere, a chaotic explosion of green erupted across the globe. The torrential rains birthed massive, hyper-humid forests of towering conifers, giant ferns, and thick, impenetrable vegetation. But make no mistake, this newly formed Eden was not a paradise. It was a dark, swampy, and highly competitive graveyard for the old kings of the earth. Before the skies broke, the undisputed apex predators of the Triassic were a group of massive, heavily armored reptiles called the crurotarsans, distant, terrifying cousins of modern crocodiles. These beasts were built perfectly for the dry, dusty world that used to exist. They were sluggish, heavy, ground-dwelling ambush predators. They relied on low-lying vegetation and slow-moving prey. But in this new, alien environment of endless mud, towering trees, and flooded plains, their biological advantages became fatal flaws. Unable to navigate the treacherous, swampy terrain with their short, sprawling legs, they literally sank into the mud. The low-lying plants they depended on were rotting away in the waterlogged soils, replaced by towering evergreens that reached high into the dark, rainy sky, far beyond the reach of these heavy beasts. Starving, exhausted, and unable to adapt to a world that was constantly shifting beneath their feet, the old dynasties collapsed. They vanished into the flooded earth, their bones buried deep within the dark, wet sediment. But as history constantly reminds us, nature fiercely abhors a vacuum. In the shadowy undergrowth of these dying giants, a marginalized group of agile, fast-growing survivors saw the opportunity of a lifetime. They were the dinosaurs. Before the 2 million years of rain, dinosaurs were an evolutionary afterthought. They made up roughly 5% of all terrestrial life. But in this chaotic, hyper-humid world, they possessed the exact biological toolkit required not just to survive, but to conquer. First, they walked upright, with their legs positioned directly beneath their bodies. This allowed them to sprint through the muddy swamps and thick underbrush with an ease that the sprawling reptiles could never match. Second, they grew remarkably fast, allowing them to reproduce and adapt quicker than their dying rivals. And crucially, as the ancient flora died out and was replaced by massive, towering conifers, some of these early dinosaurs adapted by growing longer necks. They could reach the high, nutrient-rich branches that no other creature could touch. They monopolized the newly formed food chain. By the time the 2 million years of rain finally began to slow, the biological hierarchy of the world had fundamentally shifted. The dinosaurs had not just survived the longest storm in planetary history, they had weaponized it. They emerged from the watery apocalypse not as the fearful rat-like scavengers of the past, but as the absolute, undisputed rulers of the planet. They built a global empire entirely upon a foundation of mud and unending rain. Eventually, incredibly, the Earth began to heal. The immense, continent-tearing volcanic eruptions in the Rangelia terrain finally ceased their fiery rampage. The colossal amounts of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere were slowly, steadily absorbed by the newly expanded global forests and the shifting oceans, gradually cooling the choked atmosphere. The heavy, bruised clouds that had shrouded the Earth for countless generations finally thinned, and then they broke.
For the first time in 2 million years, the blinding light of the sun shone clearly upon a completely unrecognizable world. The Carnian Pluvial episode came to a quiet end, but its legacy was permanently carved into the very DNA of our planet's history. This ancient cataclysm stands as a chilling, awe-inspiring reminder of the immense and terrifying power of our planet's climate. A single violent shift in the atmospheric balance was enough to drown the world, wipe out ancient established dynasties, and crown completely new ones. Think about it. If it were not for those 2 million years of unending, miserable rain, the heavy armored reptiles might have continued to rule forever. The dinosaurs might have remained a biological footnote, eventually fading into extinction. The giant, awe-inspiring fossils we marvel at in museums today, the towering predators and the gentle, long-necked giants, would simply not exist. And perhaps most profoundly, the early mammals, our very own distant furry ancestors, would have been forced down a completely different evolutionary path. The very existence of humanity, our cities, our history, and you sitting here listening to this story is, in a strange, distant, and beautiful way, a direct byproduct of the longest and most destructive storm in the history of the world. The earth is quiet now, and for today, the skies are clear, but the ancient rocks beneath our feet remember the rain. If you enjoyed unearthing this forgotten, watery chapter of our planet's history with us, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the magnificent unknown. Until next time, keep looking up, and perhaps always keep an umbrella close by.